Welcome to the Table podcast series with Bridget Johnson. Each month, we give you game-changing conversations about K-12 education and leadership. Join us as top educators, field experts, and administrators share actionable strategies to transform your school community. Let's dive in.
Welcome to The Table, the podcast where student life professionals, educators, and change makers come together to share stories, insights, and ideas for building communities where everyone belongs. I'm your host, Bridget Johnson. Today, I'm excited to welcome Sarah Hanawald, Executive Director of the Association for Academic Leaders and a former academic dean with more than 25 years of experience leading education, innovation, and independent schools across North Carolina. Her work equips academic leaders with the competencies they need to help their schools grow and thrive. Today, we're talking about generative AI in education, specifically the challenges educators face in engaging with it and what's at stake for students when schools resist. Welcome to the show, Sarah. It's so great to have you here. How are you today?
Bridget, thank you so much for having me. I am so honored to be here with you and your audience. I just can't thank you enough. I think the student life professionals are so critically important at this time. And so thank you.
Absolutely.
And, I'm doing okay. As we were talking to get ready, it was like, I was just at NAIS and NBOA and I landed last night. And this was something I was really looking forward to while I was flying around. So thank you.
Absolutely. And so, we didn't mention one Schoolhouse, and I always forget how that is integrated in the work that you do. So can you talk, before we jump in, can you talk about that a little bit? Because the people may know you from that as well.
Yeah, so folks might know us one Schoolhouse. Before that, it was Online School for Girls. And I was one of those folks who was at a girls' school, enrolling students in classes and just really enjoying the fact that the students were just taking one class with one Schoolhouse. They were fully enrolled with us, and all of their teachers were teaching full-time in a school, in an independent school somewhere. So I knew that the classes really met our standards. Mm-hmm. And so getting to join kind of the other side, how sometimes you don't want to join the other side of something.
Right.
And oh my gosh, if anything, I was blown away by the professionalism here. And then as we were providing PD and professional learning, we started seeing some needs for connections between academic leaders. It's an interesting job, right? Because if you're the academic dean at a school, you have great colleagues who are super smart in their own fields, but you're the only academic dean. And the first time I sat in that academic dean chair in the office, I was like, okay, what do I actually do now? And my predecessor wasn't there to tell me, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of the genesis of the association, if you were. How do we help people connect with those who are doing the same job they do at other schools, much like you're doing with the student life professionals?
I love that.
It's been a professional joy. It really has.
Awesome. So, let's jump right in so that we can really talk about the issue at hand, AI, which is, oh my gosh, so much going on with that right now. And I feel like it's changing every second. But even before we get there, you spent more than 25 years in independent schools as a classroom teacher, department chair, technology director, academic dean, and now the executive director. What has that journey taught you about what academic leaders actually need to be effective?
So, the thing is, it's a both and world, right? When you get into one of these positions, whether it's an early career leadership role where you're a department chair, but you're looking ahead and you've reached the job that you want and you're going to stay here and grow it. Mm-hmm. It's a job where a lot of people really like the role that they have. Sometimes in independent schools, we say that everybody's working their way up to being a head of school. Not everybody wants to be a head of school.
Nope.
And that's great because we need department chairs who spend a long time thinking about what does it mean to be a history student and what does it mean to be a professional history historian, really, one would say. And so it's that one hand on the strategic levers and one hand on the tactical levers. And so academic leaders operationalize the strategy that the board identifies in line with the mission of the school. And all the academic leaders do is make sure that it's the lived experience of the students and the teachers in the classroom, much like the deans of students make sure that student life embodies the mission in every step that students take. And when we're doing our work well, the mission is alive and fundamental to every decision that's being made at a school.
Wonderful. And so we talked a little bit about One Schoolhouse and kind of how that came about. Tell us about Association for Academic Leaders, who it serves and what gap it's filling in the independent school world.
Sure. And I kind of alluded to that, and I'm sorry I didn't finish really
Yeah, all
addressing
good.
your question because you're right, I didn't. And so what happened, this really happened during COVID when we started connecting people who were trying to figure out how are we going to conduct school in this like incredibly difficult situation all of us are in. And people had different ways of approaching it, but they really wanted to connect to someone else who did what they did.
Mm-hmm.
And as we were doing that, I'd had some association experience in the past. And I said to Brad Rathgeber, our head of school and CEO, I think that this is bigger than COVID. This is something that these folks need to know each other on an ongoing way. And he's a super intentional person. And so he got a consulting firm to come in and really look at the landscape and say, who is serving this community of people who think about teaching and learning beyond a single classroom within a school.
Mm-hmm.
And much like we said before, you have great colleagues. When you're a department chair, you know all the other department chairs, and that's your peer circle now. But they have a really different job. And I'll give you my sort of standard example, which is that the English teacher needs to think about book controversies, and they need to think about certain elements and how they're going to change them. Reading instruction has become political. The science department chair has OSHA compliance. They've got dangerous chemicals that need to be handled a certain way. These are not the same jobs.
Nope.
Even though they have similar titles and they're at the same school. And so connecting people with folks who actually do what they do at another school is just super professionally empowering. And the answer was there's a lot of it in a lot of different places, but there wasn't one organization dedicated to the work of academic leaders. And so my story for how I know that we were meeting a needed niche, I got the URL, academicleaders.org, for $200.
Oh.
Right?
Well, there you go. I love that. And so, like I said, we're here to talk about AI. So, let's set the stage there. When you look at how independent schools are currently engaging with generative AI, what are you seeing, and what are most schools, what are they doing right now? Where are they?
So, first of all, it is kind of all over the place. I don't like to say that it's the Wild West, because I think that implies a certain lawlessness that some folks use that analogy, but I just see a lot of reacting, that schools are in kind of policy whack-a-mole phase. They react to something that happens. They add a new phrase in the policy, or they do an update, rather than thinking strategically and saying, okay, it's a complex problem. There's a great framework that folks use. When is a problem complicated and when is it complex? And when it's complicated, it just means there are lots of pieces moving all over the place. But for any one piece, if you tear it apart, you have a known solution.
Right.
When it's complex, you've got to iterate. You don't know the impact of the decision you're making, so you have to watch, and you have to be willing to pivot and adjust. And the truth or the reality of the research that you do today might be different in a week.
Right.
We all know there's an article that kind of went viral, something big is happening, and it just kind of traces the evolution of generative AI since November of 2022. And, what we thought we knew, for folks particularly who only looked at some of these tools right at the beginning and went, it's not that much. It's a different world out there. And school leaders are all over the place, right? From refusing to engage to setting up custom bots themselves. I had a panel at NAIS of academic leaders who make their own bots. And one woman's made 12 for her school already,
12?
Right? Custom AI tools just for her campus.
That's crazy, but great at the same time.
I know.
How do you have time to make 12? But okay, I love it. So, but you've also expressed a concern about educator resistance to generative AI. And I think I know, but where does that resistance tend to come from? And is it fear, skepticism, lack of training, or something else?
So all of the above and something else. And I want to say, it really comes from the right place. Right? Almost all of it. There is an element of an educator's identity, right?
Mm-hmm.
That generative AI challenges because, it's not laziness, it's not antagonism, it's that concern that students' intellectual growth will be harmed. And so when you are an experienced educator who has had an impact on the lives of hundreds of children, your professional and personal identity gets tied to that. It's not the content mastery, right? We've had the internet
Right.
around for a while. We know kids can look stuff up or they might read a new book and know and learn new content. But it's that skill in passing that knowledge to the next generation and guiding student growth that AI destabilizes. And I would say that that's not something educators should be afraid of happening. I know that it's popular to read about somebody pontificating who, by the way, is not an educator, that we might have AI schools, right? And then we saw the attempt to do an AI school, and folks started pulling their kids out because it turns out student growth happens through that human interaction.
Relationships.
Right? The
Yeah.
relationship that they have with their teacher or guide is where they make the growth. It's actually one of the things that makes One Schoolhouse so outstanding, because even though we're an online school, so you better believe we're thinking about generative AI and agentic
Right.
AI, our teachers know their students really well. Our classes are small. They meet with their students. They have these one-on-one conversations. And it's that feeling of being known that helps a student stretch, try something hard for them, fail, and succeed again later. AI can play a role in how the teacher guides the student. Like the teacher could choose to implement certain kinds of AI. AI never gets tired of the same question 40 times in a row, right?
Right.
It really needs to kind of grind away at something. It's available at 11 o'clock on a Sunday night, which I hope
Right.
no teacher is, right? I want them to be in bed getting ready for Monday. So there's
Exactly.
some places where we can leverage AI that way. And then I think the other thing that teachers are concerned about, and they're right to be concerned about, is AI provides some shortcuts for kids that look like the output of the learning process, but don't represent the true intellectual growth and stimulation that a student should have gone through to produce that. And that's scary for all of us,
Right.
because we have had the ability to use output from students, whether it's text, imaging, sound, any of those, as a shortcut to seeing what's going on in that child's head.
Right.
Special educators will tell you we were wrong for a lot of students already. So in that sense, maybe this is a reckoning, right? We've got to find other ways to figure out how students are growing
Yeah.
with some of our assessments. But we have to mourn what we've lost, right? It's when we have to go through these times of change. So that, I think, is a complicated piece that educators need each other to work through, support, and practice. And you don't get it if you don't go hands-on with the tools. And the third thing is something that we are all concerned about with different areas of focus, and they're all legitimate, right? We're worried about the ethical problems. Is bias baked into the generative AI models?
Yeah.
Absolutely, right? Are there ethical considerations with the copyright violations that went into training AI on artists and authors' work without their permission? 100% that is out there. And then the environmental concern, right? We are hearing about data centers and the impact on water and electricity use. And all of those are absolutely true. And so those can lead to someone saying, you know what, I can't touch this. I don't want anything to do with it. But it's not a healthy response.
Right. And so that's a great lead into my next question in terms of what's the cost of resistance? What are we actually risking for students when educators and schools kind of opt out of this conversation? I'm like, nope, not going to do it.
Yep. So, well, one thing studies tell us, kids are using these tools, right? Our students are using these tools. And when the adults around them who actually have wisdom, discernment, insight, when those students opt out, the students navigate alone, right? They shortcut their own learning. And in some cases, they're headed into dangerous territory in terms of their mental health, the legal risks, their well-being, sometimes even their lives. And you've had Evan Harris on, and he speaks really eloquently on these issues. We learned this lesson with social media, online gaming, sources like that. We know online scams. we know that adults need to be there for students. And so that means that we have to do two things. We have to learn how to use these tools, and we have to be comfortable doing that alongside students, right?
Right.
The Gemini that you're using today or the Notebook LM isn't the same as the one a month ago when you were maybe preparing your lesson. Super frustrating to the organized, thoughtful, intentional educator, right?
Yeah.
And then we have to be learning about these tools as fast as we can in the adults in the community, because if we're not, we miss that opportunity to shape how AI could maybe help students strengthen their thinking rather than replacing it. Because, I said I didn't like the Wild West analogy. You know where it's the Wild West? College, right? Hiring. Some of these articles that are coming out about entry-level positions just disappearing.
Wow.
And it's going to be only the students who can show that they can work alongside AI. And then, honestly, Bridget, I know I said earlier that we're not going to replace teachers, but I think we might really require that they use generative AI in certain ways to better understand the impact of their work. You said nicely 25 years. I think it might have been 30. I've been around. But I remember when technology came into the classroom, and I worked with someone who did one lesson a year with fountain pens on unlined paper so that students would really experience that, just to show them the evolution of writing.
Where we've come. Mm-hmm.
I feel like, there's not a school today where that says, well, there may be. I'm going to get myself in trouble if I say that. But by and large, we're understanding that a lot of writing happens in word processing. And I see people saying, oh, blue books are making a comeback. Well, speaking of environmental impact, there's a study out there that looks at the environmental impact of manufacturing and shipping blue books and the cost, right? There's no, this is why it's a complex problem. There are not these easy solutions. And so if we're not getting our heads around it, I worry about teachers working themselves into a position through refusal where they're going to have to scramble to catch up. And we all know that it feels terrible when you have to scramble. If it feels like you're behind now and you refuse, in 2 years, you're going to feel an even bigger sense of, what am I going to do?
No, absolutely. But then also, looking at it on a global scale, we are not where other countries are in terms of adopting AI. And if we want to be competitive in that way, we've got to make sure that we're equipping our students with those tools so that they are competitive with their counterparts who are outside of the US. And I'm not sure if we are doing that very well right now.
That is a great question. And there is something that's happening with generative AI that I don't think we've seen this same way before, and that it's everywhere all at once. A lot of technologies tend to emerge in the US, and so we have kind of a natural head start. And this is definitely in that everywhere all at once category, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And so we've got to think about that and adjust accordingly. I thought that, with COVID, because we had to, that was a kind of a moment in time where, education had to pivot and had to shift and had to kind of think about things differently very quickly. And so I thought that gave us some lessons and some tools to be able to kind of manage that or navigate that. But it still feels like we're the Titanic, and it's just kind of moving slowly in some ways to get people to kind of get on board and not just kind of say, yeah, we know it's there, don't use it, but how we can use it in our classrooms and how we can kind of enhance the work that we're doing. And so, I'm really just hoping that we can kind of get this momentum going with education in general, so that our young people will be equipped, because it's like you said, everywhere all at once. And so, we've talked about educators having a responsibility both professionally and personally when it comes to AI. Let's talk about that a little bit more. I mean, what does responsibility actually look like in practice? How can we get people kind of on board to take this to the next level, so to speak?
Sure. And you said something I want to go back to just for a second.
Sure.
Though. You brought up the Titanic. And I think that iceberg mentality of we see this, right? We see, oh, they can cheat, right?
Yeah, right.
We don't see all the other things underneath that can happen. And especially if educators aren't really looking,
Right.
right? And really being careful and using sonar as well as their eyesight, or I'm going to get in trouble really fast, actually, if I try to explain how ships see icebergs.
Fair enough.
But you've got that. And part of it is, the understanding in theory, like reading the philosophers, right? The people who are thinking about, how do we make sure that we don't end up in the Matrix, right?
Right.
Nobody wants to live there, or the Terminator movies. I'm going to identify myself here as a sci-fi fan, but that's not where we want to be,
Right.
right? And so we need the adults in the classroom really thinking about that in ways. And then at the same time, we can also imagine for ourselves. We've got Data on Star Trek, right? Like, he is a very
Yeah.
benign and supportive artificial intelligence that wants to help the humans around him live better lives. So if we're going to have kids who help build that future, right, we have to be part of imagining it with them, because
Right.
there's nothing happening that a human hasn't imagined first.
Mm,
And so now when we think
I
about
like
that, it's
that.
like, oh, well, so one of the things that we've been saying forever and ever is, how do schools discourage creativity, right? We've got this transactional, you do this, I give you this grade, you get into this college, you get this job, like all of this stuff that's going on. And how about you surprise me, right? You do something I never imagined. And
Yeah,
that's not just for our art teachers, right? It's for all of us to think
exactly.
about that responsibility, to be creative that way. And I think
Yeah.
in order for academic leaders and faculty to make and revise policies, and I'd love to say that you can come up with a policy that's going to be flexible enough to last for years. I don't think that's going to happen.
No.
I mean, we're all going to have to be revising this along the way, but you really can't do that if you're not being experimental.
Right.
And Ethan Mollick wrote that you need, I think it was 6 sleepless nights. Well, don't stay up all night. Give yourself a couple of weeks instead, and get to bed at a reasonable hour. But really mess around and start asking yourself, okay, could AI help me with this task? Could AI help me with this task? That's one of the things I do in my workshops, is I try to
Mm-hmm.
get people thinking about, it's not for writing emails. Because you know who writes really good emails? Almost every independent school educator,
How about
right?
that?
Let's
Yeah.
be honest, we're good at emails. So telling us we can have AI write our emails?
It's not all that helpful, right?
Yeah. But as your thought partner, when you're going through a dilemma, learning how to have an argument with a generative AI tool, saying, okay, I want you, generative AI, to take the role of Bridget Johnson,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm thinking about this from an academic point of view, and I want you to act like her. Here's her website. Here's what she's like,
I love
right?
that.
And have her represent the student life point of view, and help and find all the places where I've overlooked the student life concerns in this plan that I've designed. And you can do that, right? And
You
that's
can,
not a
absolutely.
7-word prompt, right? Most people
It
use
is
7-word
not.
prompts.
No, you've got to really get in there and give it some detail and provide. And
Yeah.
then what I also have started to do recently is to also like ask me any clarifying questions. I actually got that from
Yes.
another colleague of mine. It's so helpful too. So I could talk all day about tips and tricks, but we want to kind of stay on topic, and just in terms of like looking at um, what can academic leaders do right now? Like how should they be positioning themselves in terms of taking leadership in this area?
Right. So we just talked about one step, right? The actually getting hands-on, but here's the step that gets overlooked too much. Really carve out time and space for faculty to
Mm-hmm.
get hands-on with these tools. And that doesn't mean I would like for you to do this at some point in your day. Maybe it's sometimes in a small group in a department, maybe it's in a larger faculty. And if you're not sure how to help teachers really go hands-on and have some of those aha moments, I can't recommend CoLab enough. It's a group of independent school teachers who are designing and sharing prompts to get each other thinking beyond that low level, oh, it could help you write your emails, or it might be able to give feedback on a student paper. It's really more powerful than that, but it takes that hands-on get a little frustrated with it, think again about your relationship. I can't believe I just said that. Think about your relationship with your AI tool
Yeah,
and
I
how you
mean,
want it to work with you, right? Tell it, don't
absolutely.
try to make me happy.
Yeah.
Argue with me.
Tell me the thing I need to hear, right?
Be a truth teller.
Be a truth teller. I think that's so important. And so important for us to kind of think about like just really playing around with it. And I think, as educators, we get kind of comfortable kind of in our lane and how we do things. And so this is really like trying to pull people out of their comfort zone in terms of thinking about doing things a little bit differently, and not relying on kind of the way things have always been
Yeah.
done. And that is scary for some people. So what do you say to those folks?
So that's true. That's why you can spend thousands of dollars if you want to on a change leadership consultant to come in and work with you. But really, I think what a lot of that work boils down to is change is a whole organization process, but it happens one person at a time. And so if you start with humans, and then you've got, changes that are going on, you've got announcements, you've got, tool selection, all of those things that happen in the middle, and then you end with humans because that's where change happens. And there's a thing actually called the change cycle where people can
Mm-hmm.
walk through like what is it like when a human being is changing. And part of it is, there's some anger and mourning over the thing that you're losing, and there's fear of the thing that's coming. And then as folks gain more confidence and feel really supported by their leadership, and that means I don't say to you, Bridget, you have to do it this way. You say, Bridget, tell me about what's going on. And I'm not asking you to tell me so that I can then tell you why you're wrong. I'm asking you to tell me so that I can affirm, oh, you are really an expert educator who cares about each of these students deeply. How does that jibe with what you're doing? And I base that conversation on what you need.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're not going to lead these kinds of changes in large group whole faculty meetings once a year.
Right. No, absolutely not. It's also, small steps, right? Small bites. It isn't like everything needs to change all at once, but we do need to make some steps heading in that direction, right? And so we talked about CoLab, but what does Association for Academic Leaders offer by way of support for schools as they navigate this?
So we have, first of all, this is something that I take a lot of joy in. So
Okay.
stop me if I go on
Love
too
it.
long. But we're operating on several different fronts here. So we've got asynchronous classes for getting your head around generative AI as a leader. And when we teach our classes, they're asynchronous, but they're paced, and we have an expert facilitator. So the folks who facilitate those classes are all academic leaders in our member independent schools. And so they've been there and done that, and they really understand the position that folks are in. So we'll have an assignment about how to look at a certain tool and how to write a prompt, and then you'll get feedback from your instructor. And we offer everything from kind of a beginner level, I've been avoiding this, I'm waiting for somebody to tell me about it type person.
Mm-hmm.
And then we've got the classes on making your own bots. That was the panel that I mentioned earlier. I had several people from that class make the mistake, honestly, of telling me, oh, here's what I did with what you taught me. And I say, aha, I would like for you to maybe teach the class next time or be a speaker.
Yeah.
And then we've tried to integrate how AI might have an impact into classes that are not about AI. So this week we're teaching a class about how to lead a curriculum audit. And so we've got some ways that generative AI can help somebody who's leading an audit built into that class now. And what that actually does is spark some thinking, right?
Yeah.
I've got something to start with, and since somebody else has another idea, and then before you know it, everybody's leaving with 5 new ideas.
That's
but sometimes
great.
we want to talk to each other, right?
Yeah, sometimes, every now and then.
Right. So we got asynchronous, but we also have once a month, we have a generative AI meetup where folks gather. And I've usually got kind of some news of the month, like something that's broken in the last month or something that's happened in a resource. And then we really let the conversation go where it will, because that group of folks is so smart. And every time they bring in so much more, I get so much more out of that than I share. And I think we all feel that way. So,
I
and I
love
would be
that.
remiss if I didn't mention Bob Wyman and Vinny Vrotny
Mm-hmm.
and Eric Walters, who are three folks who really do a lot. Stacy Tippins at Madeira School. They're
Oh,
people
okay.
who are just really tracking the kinds of changes that are going on. And what's good for them is they're getting to chat with other people
Yeah.
who are kind of doing that same work at their schools. And, you know, you're at your school and you always feel like you're ahead of everybody else. It's good to be around some folks who are also ahead of everybody else and get your
Yeah.
thinking pushed
Yeah.
a
You
little bit.
stretch a little bit. So,
Yeah. And then
Sarah,
we
if
do
you
in
could,
person,
yeah,
actually.
and in
That's something
person
that
is,
surprises people. Now we have some in-person workshops.
well, I didn't know that. Yeah. So tell me about the in-person stuff. I
Yeah.
had no idea.
So we have our forums, and we've got
Mm-hmm.
one in the Philadelphia region. But what we try to do is move around where we have members. So every year
Okay.
we have four. This year, I don't know if you're listening to this way far, you're going to be like, oh, those are over. But we've got Philly, Nashville, Tennessee, Chicago, and Los Angeles. And
Oh,
last year
awesome.
we were in Texas. We'll probably go back to Texas. So we like to move around and do some of these forums, and they always include an AI workshop. And then
Mm-hmm.
this summer we're going to do a boot camp.
Oh,
So
awesome.
if someone's interested in that, like they're like, I really just want to spend a couple of days diving in. I want to be in the boot camp, and that's what I'm going to do. We'll offer that opportunity too.
That's amazing. And so I love that you guys are offering things in person now. I mean, that's, I think there's something to be said about just getting together with folks every now and then and being able to nudge the person next to you and like, did you do that? Like, did you hear what they
Right.
said? Or like, it's so nice to be able to do that every now and then. So, Sarah, if you could shift one thing about how independent schools are approaching generative AI right now, what would it be?
You know, there's a lot to be worried about, but I don't want us to be fearful,
Yeah.
right? That approaching from fear is where we end up with kids in rows with blue books. And, you know, and I'm not saying never use another blue book. I
Right.
mean, you know, I worry about text fluency, right? Will students be able to produce text fluency? And then I have to ask myself, why am I worried about that? Should I be worried? Does the definition of fluency change, right? Math teachers had to deal with this a long time ago. But I think we have to get over ourselves and our sense of we are the preservation for learning as a way that it has always been done,
Mm-hmm.
and think of ourselves as we have a mission that helps us prepare kids for a future we don't really understand, but we want our kids to thrive when they land in it. And our missions will really guide us
Yeah.
if we let them.
Absolutely. So, as we think about closing, what gives you hope when you look at how education is evolving in response to AI?
So I think that there is nobody better positioned than independent schools to make sense of generative AI, serve frankly as models for other schools. That might sound like a little bit of hubris, but I think we and independent schools can afford to make some mistakes, recorrect, and see how we can help kids launch. We do that really well. What's
Mm-hmm.
interesting about independent schools, we have our boards and they're so much closer to our communities. I talked with an educator who has someone on his board who is a AI director at a major company that you would all know if I said the name. It's not an AI company, it does something else, but they're
Okay.
online. And that person came to present with him at a conference about AI. And he had been saying to the tech director at this school, you're not moving fast enough. You're not moving fast enough. And he watched as the room was blown away by how fast that school was moving. And there was some of this.
Mm.
And so that person came back to the tech director and said, I get it. You actually are moving at a more appropriate pace than I realized. We have that chance to interact with our, if you will, customers in a way that's much harder to do in much larger organizations. So we can really take a community approach, right? How are we going to support kids with well-being? How are we going to handle deepfakes? How are we going to make sure kids are still learning? We're really well positioned for this and we can do it.
We can do it. Absolutely. So, if there's one thing that you want people to take away from this conversation today, what would it be?
So I spent some time thinking about this.
Okay.
And it's going to sound really simple, but go to the paid generative AI tool that you use the most and ask it what it's learned about you as you've been working together. And then as you ask it that, give it something that you're thinking about that you didn't think about approaching generative AI with, and say, how do you think I should approach this given what you know about me?
Ooh,
and then I love your point. Ask me a clarifying question. Just see what happens.
I love that. What a great way to end. Sarah, thank you so much for being here today. This conversation about generative AI and the responsibility educators and leaders have to engage with it honestly and courageously on behalf of their students is exactly the kind of conversation we need to be having at every table in every school right now. So I'm so grateful that you brought your expertise and your candor to this one. Thank you so much.
Oh, I'm honored to have been invited. This was really fun. The time just flew. Thank you.
I know. Time flies by, right? And so, folks, if you want to learn more about Sarah's work, check out the Association for Academic Leaders and the resources they offer for academic leaders in independent schools. We'll include links to their website, any additional resources in our show notes. And don't forget, if you're not already following us on Instagram and TikTok, come find us. Search for the Dean's Roundtable on both platforms for leadership insights, community building resources, and the conversations that matter to student life professionals. We'd love to see you there. If you're enjoying the table, don't forget to subscribe, share it with a friend, or leave us a review. It really helps us, helps more people find us. Thank you for pulling up a chair at the table today. I hope this conversation gave you something to think about, or maybe even something to try out on your own in your community. And as always, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and we'll see you next time at the table.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Table Podcast Series. Is your student life program delivering on your mission? Our new K-12 student life assessment moves you beyond anecdotes to evidence-based decisions. Through comprehensive stakeholder surveys and expert analysis, you'll get concrete insights across 8 essential dimensions of student life, from culture and wellness to staff effectiveness and resource allocation. We're seeking founding partner schools to be the first to experience this transformative assessment process and help shape the future of student life evaluation. Today's episode was hosted by Bridget Johnson in conversation with Sarah Hanawald, produced and edited by Andrick Sigmund and music by PremiumBeat.com. For any questions, contact information can be found in the episode description. And, as always, thanks again for listening.